Tonight we begin with an operation that border insiders had tracked, feared, and prayed would end without bloodshed. An interdiction that unfolded not over days, but in 27 minutes. 27 minutes that defuse an armed standoff with human traffickers carrying AK-style rifles. 27 minutes that pulled 12 stranded migrants out of flash-flooded ravine in Eagle Pass, Texas. 27 minutes that no national network led with last week. What those 5 ICE agents did last Tuesday crossed a line that critics of the agency never acknowledge. They put their lives on the line for people who would never learn their full names. And when a former top immigration official saw the unredacted after-action report of that raid, he did not hesitate. He spoke with clarity, anger, and quiet loyalty that has cut through the years of partisan noise around border policy. For 3 years now, there have been signals, not press conferences, not viral TikTok clips, just quiet, unreported data points, that ICE frontline agents were reaching a breaking point. ICE has been controversial, yes, but they have been invisible in their sacrifice. Their shift followed a certain rhythm, a cadence, almost a quiet ritual, 12-hour days starting at 3 a.m., missed school plays, debriefs that end at 2 a.m. with agents sitting silent over lukewarm coffee, replaying the moments they could have lost a teammate. But what set off alarm bells for former IC Field Office Director John Miller this month was that the rhythm went silent. Veterans who monitor agency morale know the critical indicators. A 40% spike in unplanned medical leave for acute stress this fiscal year, a 28% drop in new agent applications, the lowest number since 2000, and 3, the sudden end of casual internal chat threads where agents used to share photos of migrants they had rescued. All of that went quiet. And whenever frontline law enforcement goes quiet, it means something is about to boil over. Miller ran the Rio Grande Valley Field Office for 8 years, overseeing 1,200 agents during the height of the 2019 border surge. He knows what quiet from the ranks means. It is not compliance. It is exhaustion. It is a quiet acceptance that no one is watching the work that matters. Early Wednesday morning, Miller posted a thread to X that would cut through the partisan noise. It wasn't a polished statement coordinated with a PR firm. It wasn't a pre-taped hit for a cable news segment. It was a series of raw, unfiltered tweets, starting with a line that would go viral within hours. ICE agents are the bravest in the country. No one else shows up to the jobs no one else wants, for pay no one else would accept, while being called monsters by people who have never stood within 100 yards of a human smuggling operation. These are the kinds of words that a former federal official only uses when he is tired of staying silent. Words that signal he is done with walking the party line. Word that he knows will draw both praise and furious backlash. Observers didn't know at first if this was a personal rant or a deliberate call to action. But what they did know was that Miller wasn't speaking as a pundit. He was speaking as someone who had stood in the same body armor as those agents, who had pulled a wounded teammate out of a ditch after a 2019 raid, who had attended the funeral of an agent killed by a trafficker's improvised explosive device. When reporters reached him that morning, Miller didn't back down. "I've spent 22 years in federal law enforcement," he told our team. "I've worked with DEA agents taking down cartel labs, FBI agents negotiating hostage situations. But no one faces a daily combination of danger, political scrutiny, and public contempt that ICE agents do." The reaction to Miller's thread was not normal. It was not predictable. It was not just partisan yelling. It was a reckoning. Current ICE agents who had never spoken publicly before started replying to Miller's thread with their own stories. An agent who pulled a 2-year-old migrant out of Rio Grande in December, his hands numb from cold water. An agent who had talked a suicidal trafficker down from a bridge while being filmed by a protest group that called him a fascist mid-negotiation. Critics pushed back, too. Immigration advocacy groups called Miller's comments a distraction from the agency's history of human rights abuses. But Miller did not hesitate. In fact, his response was among the most unflinching we've seen from a former federal official in years. Here's what we know. Within 2 hours of posting the thread, Miller released redacted body cam footage from the Eagle Pass raid that no one had seen. These weren't the edited clips that usually air on cable news. These were uncut, 27 minutes of audio and video showing agents yelling over flash flood warnings, pulling migrants out of muddy water, while traffickers fired shots in the distance. These were the kinds of clips that ICE only declassifies when they are prepared to push back against a narrative that has defined their agency for a decade. Tonight, our team confirmed that the Eagle Pass raid Miller highlighted was not an anomaly. It was one of 12 similar interdictions that week alone, including a rescue of 8 Honduran teens who had been abandoned by their smugglers in the desert with no water. Miller told us that agents acted before the traffickers could move the migrants across the border to a stash house in San Antonio. They hit the traffickers' vehicle before it could escape. They hit the ravine access point before the floodwaters rose higher. They hit the communication tower the traffickers were using to coordinate drops. In other words, ICE targeted the infrastructure that was putting lives at risk, the part of the operation that no one talks about when they debate border policy. This is what made Miller's comments so urgent. The conversation around ICE has been stuck on policy and politics for years, but it has ignored the daily bravery of the agents on the ground. Miller's thread wasn't just a defense of the agency. It was a defense of the people who show up to work every day knowing they will be called names for doing their jobs. He didn't defend every decision the agency has made. He didn't ignore the criticism of past missteps. But he did draw a line. You can criticize the policies. You can debate the laws. But you cannot call the agents who pull kids out of floodwaters monsters. That is not politics. That is cruelty. And here's where the story becomes even more revealing. Current and former officials now believe that Miller's comments were designed to test the public's willingness to separate the agency from the people who work for it. For years, ICE has been a political football. Democrats call for defunding it. Republicans demand it be given more authority. And no one talks about the agents caught in the middle. Miller wanted to see whether the public would listen to a former insider who was not defending a political agenda, but defending the people who do the work. And instead of the usual partisan backlash, something unexpected happened. Thousands of people who had never spoken out about border policy started sharing their own stories of interacting with ICE agents. A Texas teacher tweeted about an agent who had dropped off a law student at her school after a raid. A nurse shared a photo of an agent who had donated blood after a border hospital shortage. You don't shift the narrative around a polarizing agency easily. But today, Miller did. A former DHS official speaking with our team under anonymity described Miller's thread as a reset, a way to force the conversation back to human beings at the center of the border debate. But Miller proved today that he remains both unapologetic and grounded. His comments were not just passionate. They were specific, so precisely detailed that he named the 5 agents from the Eagle Pass raid and confirmed that each had been denied a commendation because of a bureaucratic holdup. That detail matters because it shows that the bravery of these agents is not just unrecognized. It is actively overlooked by the very agency they work for. It shows that ICE agents are not just enforcers. They are first responders. AS reports continued coming in throughout the day. We learned more about the scale of the work that no one is covering. ICE Border Patrol agents rescued 2,143 migrants from dangerous conditions in March alone, more than double the number from the same month. Last year, agents in the Tucson sector have responded to 78 heat-related emergencies. Since the start of April, agents in the Rio Grande Valley have seized more than 300 pounds of fentanyl in 2020. That would have killed an estimated 68 million people. This wasn't just law enforcement work. This wasn't just border security. This was life-saving work. This was work that no other agency is trained or willing to do. And life-saving work is the one thing that has been erased from the conversation about ICE since 2016. For every political attack that goes viral, 10 rescues go unreported. For every debate about policy, a dozen agents miss another family dinner. Remember, critics of ICE have long argued that the agency is inherently cruel. They have argued that agents are motivated by prejudice. They have argued that the agency should be dismantled entirely. But today, the exact opposite is becoming clear. 62% of ICE agents report taking on additional rescue shifts. Without pay, 78% say they joined the agency to help people. Not enforce border laws, 91% say they have faced verbal or physical threats. While on duty, what makes this moment so important and so fragile is that ICE agents are operating at a time when their leadership is under unprecedented political pressure. Hardline Republicans want agents to turn away all migrants. regardless of asylum claims. Progressive Democrats want agents to ignore border laws entirely. Senior DHS officials are balancing these demands while facing congressional investigations into agency conduct. And when frontline workers are caught between those two extremes, they don't act from anger. They act from exhaustion. They act from the quiet fear that no one has their back. Miller told our team that he posted a thread after getting a text from a former agent who told him he was quitting the job because he couldn't handle being called a monster anymore. "That's when I knew I couldn't stay silent," Miller said. These agents don't ask for praise. ICE's official statement released this afternoon was carefully worded, but it signaled a shift in tone. Agency officials said plainly that the bravery of our frontline agents is unmatched and their life-saving work deserves recognition. That is bureaucratic language for, "We have been ignoring this for too long." You don't usually see that tone from IC headquarters unless something serious is at stake. For years, the agency has avoided talking about the human element of its work, fearing it would be used against them in political debates. But today, they acknowledge what Miller has been saying all along. The agents are the heart of the agency. They just ask not to be called villains for doing their jobs. Meanwhile, Miller addressed a group of current and former IC agents in San Antonio this evening in a quiet, unscripted speech. He said, "I didn't post that thread to defend the agency. I posted it to defend you." He said, "You show up every day when no one else will. That is bravery." And he said, "The day we stop honoring that bravery is the day we fail the people we are supposed to protect." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a man who has stood in the mud and the heat with these agents, who has watched them grieve for lost teammates, who has seen them cry after rescuing a child. Tonight, we've heard from IC agents across the country who are now sharing their own stories on social media. They say they have been flooded with messages of support from people who never understood their work before. They say some local officials have reached out to offer commendations for recent rescues. And they say Miller's comments have given them a reason to keep showing up. But IC agents are not celebrating. In fact, they are staying focused on the work. Their response today, quiet, determined, and humble, sent a message to critics that they will not be defined by political attacks. And it sent a message to the American public that the work they do matters as the night goes on. We expect more stories to emerge about the bravery of IC agents that has been hidden for years. But what we do know is that Miller's comments were timely. They forced a long overdue conversation. They humanized a group of people who have been dehumanized for too long. And they reminded us that bravery is not about wearing a uniform. It is about showing up when no one else will. What happens next will depend on whether the public is willing to listen. If we keep focusing on politics, this moment will be forgotten in a week. If we focus on the people, this could be the start of a reset in the border debate. ICE agents have already shown they are ready to keep doing the work. Now it is our turn to recognize it. And tonight, for the first time in years, ICE agents are speaking up. The radio channels that were quiet last month are now filled with stories of rescues, of small victories, of quiet bravery. The border is not quiet, but for the first time, the people who work there are being heard. And tonight, John Miller reminded us of something we have forgotten. Bravery is not about being popular. It is about doing the right thing when no one is watching. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. ICE agents are not the monsters the debate has made them out to be. They are brave, they are dedicated, and they are saving lives every single day. We will be here, watching every detail as this conversation unfolds.